Hello, everybody. My name is Jimmy Smith, and welcome to the Wine with Jimmy channel. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. So this is part 1 of 5 parts regarding Burgundy, Bourgogne in France. So we are going to be looking at the very complex area, an area that has over 80 appellations. You don't really need to know that much for your level 3, but it is a complex place, but we'll try and make it as digestible and understandable as humanly possible. So as I mentioned, I'm Jimmy Smith of the Wine with Jimmy channel. All of the social media is found at the bottom of the slides. So if you want to get in touch with us, any comments, questions or concerns, please do. This is our free part of the Burgundy series. Parts 2, 3 and 4 will all be available to members only. Part 5 is already actually up. That's Chablis and Chardonnay, so you can watch that also as your own leisure. Okay, so let's rock and roll through all of this. So there is a lovely holding picture of the Hospice de Beaune. This is an old hospital which is situated in the centre square of Beaune. Today it is a museum and holds the annual charity auctions. It's a wonderful place that has this very tiled patterned roof, which is quite common across the Burgundy region. It's quite special. If you ever do get the chance, if you're in London, do pop down to my wine bar called Streatham Winehouse. We have replicated that pattern around the bottom of the bar. So it's quite iconic, and you know you're coming into Burgundy when you start to see some of the famous buildings with their roofs, and the churches, etc., have this tile pattern to it. So where are we looking? Here we are in France. So Burgundy is split over quite a large area, encompassing sort of northern Burgundy, which is close to areas like Champagne and Ouillon. It's up towards Paris, and then all the way through Dijon, Beaune, towards Lyon in the southern section. So we are firmly here looking at continental part of France, and that's going to be what we look at in the next couple of slides. So let's go on to the next one. So that is your Burgundy region. So you'll see way off in the northern area, so northwest area, where we have, let's pop this up here. So just up here, as this Chablis arrow is pointing to, this is around the city of Auxerre, and we have the town of Chablis and its surrounding vineyards. There are many other vineyards up here, but you are just required to know this area for your WSET Level 3. On the left-hand side, it gives you a kind of an overview of the general macroclimates that we find in Burgundy. So in this area in the north, we find it being quite cool because the latitude is quite north here, going up towards, of course, Champagne. So we have a cool climate here. So general average temperatures in the growing season below 16.5 degrees Celsius. And then as it heads down towards Lyon, and here you'll see places such as Dijon, Beaune, Chalonnaise and Mâconnais, and all of our associated regions, this is more moderate, so around 16.5 to 18.5 degrees Celsius on average during the growth season here. But both of the areas, all of this area is continental, so therefore landlocked, not influenced, well, not influenced dramatically by any seas and oceans. You will still get the Gulf Stream effect, though, happening across most of France. Continentality is quite extreme here. That means differences between seasons. So summers tend to be very hot, winters tend to be very cold, and you will find quite a bit of snow. And there's also quite big diurnal differences here. So these are the differences between the night and day. So in a summer month, you'll easily get around 30 degrees Celsius in summer in the daytime, and then at night time dropping down to sort of 12, 13 degrees Celsius. So quite big swings here. This means that the grapes can refresh themselves from the heat of the summer day and kind of get ready for the next day by refreshing in that night. And that's really important for maintaining quite high acidities across the board. So Chablis is at the top of the region there, the coolest area, exclusively for Chardonnay. And some of those real linear, lean styles and very minerally in that area. As we head south, between Dijon and Beaune, the cities of Dijon and Beaune, we have the Côte de Nuits, which is a part of what we call the Côte d'Or. So let's just put an arrow in here. So this whole area, the reddish and the purple area, is called the Côte d'Or. Okay, Côte. I don't have any accents on my laptop here. So Côte d'Or for the whole area, split into the two zones. So the one that's identified on the right is the Côte de Nuits. The word côte means slope. So this is the slope of Nuits. Nuits is a town situated about 2/3 of the way down that red area. So 2/3 of the way down from Dijon. Famous for Pinot Noir in this area. Below that, we have the Côte de Beaune, so the slopes of Beaune. Beaune is the main city here in this kind of purpley area, the kind of cultural centre for Burgundy as well. Beautiful historical town, lovely old town in the centre, and of course that Hospice de Beaune, that first picture is found here as well. So that is the Côte de Beaune. Then we have a slightly larger expanse to the south of that, to the west of Chalon-sur-Saône, and this is the Côte Chalonnaise, so the slopes of Chalon. And here, this is kind of an overspill area from the Côte de Beaune, the Côte d'Or, and there are some good examples of both Chardonnay and Pinot Noir found here. The Côte de Beaune is mainly Chardonnay. It's about half and half, but it is mainly Chardonnay in that area. And then finally at the bottom, which is predominantly Chardonnay, is the Mâconnais, just north of the city of Mâcon and just on the border of Beaujolais. And this is a large expanse of some more simpler wines for the most part in this area. I just wanted to give you therefore an idea of the location. And as you move down that list from Chablis to Mâconnais, you get from cool to moderate. This means there is more ripening in the grape varieties as you head south. So there is a marked difference between Chardonnay in Chablis and Chardonnay in Mâconnais, for instance. You'll often find in Chablis Chardonnay the very sort of linear green, and by green apple, like Granny Smith green apple, very tart, and things like minerally, lemony characteristics. In the Mâconnais, because of the warmth here and the better ripening, you'll tend to find slightly more red apple or sweeter apple notes, and things like a little bit of stone fruit like peach as well, with some good acidities behind those. So there is a diversity within this region, which is fascinating, of course, in the one region. Okay, so that's really the macroclimate of the area, with a few little breakdowns there between the north and the south. It is important to talk about weather hazards here, though, because Burgundy is subject to quite a lot of weather hazards. So this means we have some issues here, and it's actually quite difficult to cultivate the vine in this region. So first and foremost, rainfall. Now, most of France, and certainly most of course, the west, but also the north, and parts of the center of France are affected by the very wet and warm Gulf Stream, which is pulled across the Atlantic, starting in the Central Americas, pulled across the Atlantic, and then brings a lot of wet and warm weather to Western Europe. So this can affect this area. A lot of it falls, of course, on Western France and Northern France, but it can be pulled across towards Burgundy. So we will have rainfall in this area. It's not as much as, say, somewhere like Bordeaux, but there is still rainfall throughout the year. And the two specific times they would like you to understand that it's the most impactful is flowering. So that is going to be around sort of June-ish time. And if there is these June showers, June rainfall, that will disrupt flowering. It may actually create very poor flowering and lower the fruit set, so how much fruit is produced from the flowering. So this can drastically reduce yields at this point. And then sort of fast forwarding towards the end of the year and in harvest time, so September, October, you will find, normally around September, you'll find that there can be rainfalls around harvest as well. And both of the varieties, Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, are subject to this, and they do suffer with rot, specifically Pinot Noir. And if this happens, of course, a lot of fruit will have to be eliminated because it can cause off flavors in the wine. So that will drastically reduce yields. So harvest rainfall can be a big issue. Then we have spring frosts. Both Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, which are related grape varieties, are sadly early budding grape varieties. So they are both subject to spring frost because they run the gauntlet, the risk more of being affected by spring frost because of their early budding cycle. So these spring frosts, which can occur in April and May, can of course cause a lot of issues within the region. They can dramatically reduce the yields, big time, of course. And we actually go into a lot more detail on the Chablis section about ways to combat about spring frosts, but it's clearly in your textbooks about the major methods. There are better sites of vineyards where are not so prone to frosts, and they're on slopes. It's one of the important factors of slopes, but it can be an issue here, spring frost, and that can dramatically reduce the yields. And then because of the continentality of this region, there can be some localized, quite intensive hail storms. Hail is big bits of ice which is pelted out of the sky down to the ground at terminal velocity and can damage and destroy many things, including cars and houses and glass panes and you name it. Vineyards are no exception. They will be affected by hailstorms and they can be damaged, they can be destroyed. Throughout summer, it depends on when exactly, but they can shred leaves, they can damage flowering, they can damage the grapes themselves, leading to splitting and rotting. So often if it's such a powerful hailstorm, it will in fact wipe out a whole local area for vineyards and other plants. So hailstorms can be a bit of an issue. One way that this is combated against is that grapes are actually sourced from all over Burgundy for certain wines. So maybe your grapes are affected in one village, but you do have grapes from other villages that you purchase or that you own. So therefore, it won't ruin the whole entire crop of your production, your labels. And now we're going to talk a little bit about the layout of the land and a little bit about geology on here. They don't go into too much detail about that for the level 3 certificate. But in Burgundy, because it is generally a cool area, cool to moderate, the importance of slope cannot be underestimated. It's very important. So what we have, of course, is many areas named after slopes. So you have the Côte d'Or, Côte de Nuits, Côte de Beaune, Côte Chalonnaise, etc. That means, of course, they are dominated by some form of slopes. The slopes all lie on the western side and the vineyards are on the east, so facing east. This is remarkably important because that means they are protected from that Gulf Stream, from that westerly wind. So let's scribble that in. So what you'll have coming across here is the westerly wind. And that westerly wind is buffered and kind of mitigated by the hills and the forests that are on the hills. So therefore, the slopes that lie on the eastern side remain quite protected from that westerly wind. So that's quite important. Also, the slope offers a couple of things. It offers better drainage. So when you have rainfall, let's draw in a little bit of rainfall here as well. So when we have rainfall coming down here, okay. Now at the bottom of the slope where the village and the regional AOCs are, that can actually become quite inundated with water because it doesn't drain, it stays in the topsoil where your root systems are. In the premier crus, they'll tend to actually run down as surface runoff, so that runs down the vineyard. And grand cru, they drain very well, but some water is retained for what the vine needs. So it has the perfect balance in that middle area, hence why we find our very best wines like grand cru and premier cru in the middle of the slope area. So the mid slope is remarkably important for that good drainage. The slopes are good for protection against the westerly wind. And the third reason would be to do with aspect, which I believe is what we'll go through next. Yes, so aspect is the next reason of slopes. So what is the importance of aspect? Aspect is our direction of our slope, and so therefore which way it faces. And here I've given you some points of the compass. So we've gone from west on this side through southwest, south, southeast, and east. So this is just to give you an idea, and specifically with Pinot Noir, in fact, about the direction of your slope. Now here in Burgundy, most slopes come from south to east. So it's this area, south, southeast, and east facing slopes. And that's because, remember, it's on the east slopes are protected from the westerly wind. So if you grow Pinot Noir on an east-facing vineyard site on a slope, this will get the sunshine more in the morning, which is a very gentle sunshine. And as, of course, the Earth is spinning around the sun, it moves, and the sun moves into its zenith in kind of the south and then towards the western part. So easterly facing slopes will get more morning sun, less afternoon sun. So that means, because the morning sun is much cooler and much more gentle, there's less solar radiation, the grapes will ripen, but more elegantly and more delicately. So Pinot Noir on east facing will often be a little bit more feminine, they say, or elegant, and not so concentrated, but they can have beautiful acidities. A southeast facing slope will have a little bit more better ripening because, of course, it is now more facing south. And this is, remember, it's just in Burgundy, so this is in the northern hemisphere. So that southeasterly aspect means that there's a bit more of the sunshine around midday and towards midday. So that means that that'll be a bit more ripened. And in fact, a lot of vineyards in Burgundy face southeast. Then south facing, we have some in Burgundy facing south. And of course, this is going to get much better sunlight around the midday and certainly around lunchtime, when the sun is a bit more powerful, of course, and there's more heat and there's more ripening and solar radiation. So these will be more intense. If you were to then grow Pinot Noir on southwest facing or even west facing, more southwest, which bits are in the Côte d'Or, like Chardonnay, they will have that very aggressive afternoon sunshine, which tends to really ripen the grapes. And in fact, some parts of Burgundy which are found on southwest facing slopes, often critics label these, when they taste them in big tastings, label it like a New World style that reminds them of a more ripened, sometimes dried fruits and much more concentration, maybe less balance, but certainly more concentration. So aspect, certainly with elegant grapes and delicate grapes like Pinot Noir, can have a huge impact in terms of the actual style. So once again, most of our slopes here face sort of east to south in our vineyards of Burgundy. So the key grape varieties. Now, because we will go through Chardonnay in great detail when we look at the Côte de Beaune and other regions like the Mâconnais, I'm just actually mentioning what Chardonnay is good for here in terms of its production. It is the key grape variety, about 50% of production. And that's really because of Chardonnay's popularity in the last sort of 30, 40 years or so. So half of production here, and made, of course, in a linear light style, which is quite minerally up in places like Chablis, and can be completely complex, rich, malolactic, buttery, oaky, in certain other areas and village commune zones as well. So Chardonnay, very, very key grape variety. About a third of production is Pinot Noir. And Pinot Noir is found mainly in the Côte de Nuits for us, but there is some in the both the Côte de Beaune and the Chalonnaise. And Pinot Noir, as I mentioned, really site-specific aspect, slope, all of those have a dramatic part to play in the overall style of the wine. Both of these grape varieties are old grape varieties. We have a lot of history behind them from this region. They have also therefore adapted lots of different clones of these varieties. So along with the site, the vineyard itself, things like aspect and so on and so on, the clonal influences are quite specific here as well. And different clones have different adaptable characteristics. Maybe they are better at water absorption, maybe they are better in more drought-like conditions, maybe they're better on different aspects, and so on and so on and so on. So there's a lot of clonal types of both of these available in Burgundy. We have Aligoté. Aligoté is a grape variety which is a cousin of Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, but unfortunately it's kind of always been the ugly duckling, and it's always been left behind, bless it. And therefore, because it is the ugly duckling, I have a soft spot for it. So what happens with this? Well, Aligoté has had to contend with Chardonnay for over 1,000 years. It's lost that battle, so Chardonnay is found in our most favourable areas where Aligoté isn't. Aligoté is normally on flatter land, it produces more volume and often more neutral wines with high acidities. But there are some good areas, and certainly some producers are focusing on this grape variety. So if you do find it on favourable areas with good aspect and slope, Aligoté and the good clones of Aligoté can produce really wonderfully aromatic and textured wines. So it's a bit of a Jekyll and Hyde grape variety due to the fact, really, of its ambitious cousin Chardonnay, which has kind of over-dominated it for so long. And then we have Gamay. Of course, we have Gamay. Gamay is a grape variety which has been populating most of France and certainly central parts of France for many years. It's a grape that the aristocracy of old have hated, and it's a grape of the people. Gamay yields very well, often 4 times the amount of Pinot Noir, and can be also left unchecked and left alone, and it will still really look after itself. It's a very solid grape variety, Gamay, very solid vine. Here in Burgundy, because of course Gamay we'll talk about in Beaujolais more, but here in Burgundy, Gamay is considered just an early drinking style. It'd be found in many blends, yes, in more simpler Burgundian wines you can find a bit of Gamay, but light, sort of gentle stuff. Okay, so now we're going to go through the hierarchy, give you some examples of those hierarchy, and then we'll go through some questions, some written, short written answer questions. So here is your triangle of the hierarchy in Burgundy. At the bottom of the ladder, according to what you need to know for your textbooks, you need to know that there are some regional appellations in Burgundy, such as Bourgogne Rouge and Bourgogne Blanc. Both of these are regional ones. The grapes will be sourced from all over Burgundy, and they will generally be an introduction style or a simpler style of both red and white. So Bourgogne Rouge and Bourgogne Blanc. They will normally be dominated with Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, respectively. Okay, and often found on flatter lands, places which will have poorer drainage, more volume, less concentration, and so on. There are sub-regional areas as well. So the regional zones are broken into what used to be called districts, now sub-regional zones. And these are things like Bourgogne Haute Côte de Nuits, so Burgundy upper slopes of Nuits, Bourgogne Haute Côte de Beaune, so Burgundy upper slopes of Beaune, Mâconnais, and Mâconnais Village, for instance. So these are more sub-regional. There's more kind of inherent terroir aspects to it. And what we mean by that is terroir concepts, really, is, they have specific locations. There's a bit more of a microclimate about these zones. So, for example, the Bourgogne Haute Côte de Nuits is actually on the top slopes, on the upper slopes in the hills, behind the very famous southeast-facing slope of the Côte de Nuits. This is an area, therefore, that's a bit more affected by the elements. It's a bit more sporadic up there, and it can be, wines that are a bit more, more concentration than a regional, but less than a village level. Above that, then, these regions and sub-regions are populated with villages. A commune is a village. So if the grapes are exclusively sourced from that village, it can bear the name of that village on the label. Examples of this include Chablis, of course, Gevrey-Chambertin in the Côte de Nuits, Meursault in the Côte de Beaune, Mercury, which is in the Côte Chalonnaise, Puy-Fussé, which is in the Mâconnais, and then Beaune, which is in the Côte de Beaune, of course. So they are very well respected. They've been known over centuries and centuries. So, of course, they hold a lot of weight. A lot of people will tend to produce villages if they can, village-level commune wines. Within each of those villages will be sites of very good importance, and they are called première cru. So you'll have on the label the name of the village, the commune, and the première cru vineyard, the named vineyard. So the example they're giving there is Beaune Grève, and Beaune is our village, Grève is our named vineyard. So these are going to be, of course, on some of the slope areas facing southeasterly, east and south, with good drainage, often around the Grand Cru areas. And then the top one, of course, is Grand Cru. So these are the highest quality vineyard sites, the best areas, as we've just gone through, within a village, within a commune. So you'll have Le Montrachet, which of course is in the Montrachet villages, Le Courton, which is within Alax-Courton on the Courton Hill. And the list will go on for these. These are your most expensive, premium, and highest quality level wines. They are on the best sites, best slopes, best drainage, and often they'll have a hell of a lot of history behind them, been produced here for thousands of years. So that is your Grand Cru level. And to put it into labeling for you, just so you've got some clear labels, here you have a Bourgogne Pinot Noir label from Chateau de Dracy, and that is from Albert Bichot. And this is a Bourgogne Pinot Noir. So it just means a Burgundy Pinot Noir. That is a regional label. Then you have a sub-regional label, which is Albert Bichot again. This is Côte de Nuits Village. Okay, so this is a sub-region as a part of Burgundy. So that's around the Côte de Nuits, but all of the village areas around that. Then you have the village. So Albert Bichot, the Von Romani is the name of the village. And within that village, you can have Première Cru sites, of course. And this is Von Romani, that's the named village. And then Première Cru, Les Mâconnais. So Les Mâconnais. And that is the Première Cru name of that vineyard. So you have the village level, Von Romani, and then you have the named vineyard, Les Mâconnais. And then some of these villages, but not all, have Grand Cru. And in Von Romani, there is Richebourg, and it says Grand Cru on the label. With a Grand Cru, it will not put the name of the village. It just leads with the name of the Grand Cru. So this says Richebourg, which is a very famous one, of course. Okay, so that is going from more sort of acceptable quality from regional to Grand Cru, which of course is exceptionally high premium quality. Okay, so just to wrap up this for the next few minutes, some questions associated to what we just learnt. So this is our working written question. Please remember that the success of your examination will be centered around the written section. The multiple choice is often done very well. The tasting is often done very well, but it is this written area which is often the most challenging. Name 3 weather hazards and their effect on the vines in Burgundy. So how these hazards affect the vines in Burgundy. First of all, a reduction of yield. So this is an effect with summer rainfall that can disrupt flowering and harvest rainfall that can cause rot. That is enough to get you 2 marks there. In fact, that's enough to really get you 3, but it's actually just 2 marks per hazard here. So that's your first one, which we went through earlier. Pinot Noir is specifically susceptible to those harvest rainfalls. Hazard 2, spring frosts can occur up to May that reduce yields by damaging or destroying the buds. Now, some of this wording won't be directly found in the Burgundy section of your text. What you are required to do and how you should link to understand is link something you've learned earlier on in the book about the viticultural aspects, general viticultural aspects. So it mentions in the book that spring frosts here can occur up to May, but it doesn't say anything else. You are expected to link it to earlier in your textbook, which say reduce yields by damaging and destroying buds. Okay, the general concept. Hazard 3 is the hailstorms. So summer localized hailstorms can damage or destroy the vines, leading to a reduction in yield. The same again. The only thing that's mentioned in your Burgundy section is summer hailstorms. So you need to then add what you would learn earlier on in the course to that. It's your understanding of the concept. Okay, so that will be 6 marks, 2 marks per hazard in that instance. Next up is describe 2 reasons why Pinot Noir is particularly a challenge to grow here in Burgundy. Now, immediately, we know it's a cool or moderate area. That is not a problem with Pinot. Pinot actually prefers that. It is an early ripener. So please don't put down anything around the fact that it's Pinot Noir is an early ripener, because that's actually a benefit. We're looking at problems. So Pinot Noir is early budding. That is a problem because there is a greater risk of spring frosts, which of course will occur in somewhere like April or May. So Pinot Noir therefore runs the risk of being affected by spring frost. And reason 2 is Pinot Noir, really due to its thin skins, is quite susceptible to rot, and yields can be dramatically affected by those harvest rainfalls. Pinot Noir is quite subject to that. So there will be 2 marks available per reason there. And describe the likely viticultural conditions of a Grand Cru or Premier Cru vineyard. Now, in your text, they kind of group these two together. Grand Cru is the best, but Premier Cru can be sometimes better, but they're normally just below in quality, but near in quality. So we need to understand what you would expect in the vineyard with these sites. So first of all, they are likely to be found on mid-slopes where there is a great drainage and less frost risk, because there's good aeration on a slope. I've highlighted 3 things there because that will get you 3 marks in that one sentence. Mid-slopes, good drainage, and less frost risk. The frost risk is mentioned in your Burgundy part. The drainage is something you should just understand about slope, the effect of a slope, the fact it will drain better in that area. That will be found in your earlier parts of your textbook. The next part is, in addition, the aspect of these slopes will often be south to east. So that's 1 mark there. Offering protection from westerly winds, that's 1 mark. And better but gentle ripening conditions as they are facing the sun or have good aspect towards the sun. And that will get you your 6th mark. Okay, now there are other things that potentially could be mentioned here, but it's difficult to generalize. So you could say often that the vines are generally older in Grand Crus and Premier Crus, but it's not always the case. You could also talk about clones. There are likely to be very high quality and suited clones to the specific location. So I think that actually that is quite a good thing to include in there. It says viticultural conditions, but the actual vine itself and the clone of the vine itself would fit into that. It is not a human influence so much. They are natural mutations and clones. So that would be fine as well. So that is it for this rather long section. We're looking at nearly 35 minutes. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I hope you found this very useful. Parts 2, 3, and 4, which is all listed here, will only be available for our members. And that is available on our winewithjimmy.com. So that's our e-learning portal, which gives you really great access to extra videos. So lots of members-only videos, loads of examination questions, multiple choice questions, over 700 of them, short written answer questions, flashcards, revision sessions. It's a very useful portal to give you more confidence as you go towards your examination. So please have a look at that for the extra ones. Part 5, which is in fact Chablis and Chardonnay, is already online. That's available as free content on the YouTube channel. Okay, great. So thank you so much for your time and attention. Any comments, concerns, or questions, please get in touch either through the Wine with Jimmy website or with social media at Wine with Jimmy. It's been a pleasure, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.